The aftermath of a deadly clash between the Hells Angels and the cartels will be remembered for years. For decades, the United States has waged war on drugs, hunting cartel hideouts and burning their operations to the ground. But this time, the poison makers themselves faced a new kind of reckoning: the infamous Hells Angels. How did the motorcycle gang strike so decisively? And how did the cartel respond to the unexpected assault? Join us as we reveal how cartel bosses met their fate at the hands of one of the most feared outlaw groups in history. The Hells Angels were always known as dangerous barroom fighters. For decades, their name alone inspired fear. From street brawls to organized crime, they built a reputation that made law enforcement wary and rival gangs cautious. But their story didn't stop in biker hangouts. Their attention eventually turned to something far more dangerous: the cartels. Why would a group of motorcyclists risk crossing paths with one of the most violent criminal organizations in the world? Over the years, the cartel's poison had torn through communities and even biker crews. For the Hells Angels, it wasn't just about territory or money anymore. It became personal. Their approach was methodical. Unlike barroom fights where chaos ruled, the Angels brought coordination and precision to the desert battlefield. Using tactics honed over decades of conflict, they targeted cartel operations, hitting hard and vanishing without a trace. This unexpected clash sent shockwaves across the borderlands. Law enforcement could only watch as a paramilitary-style biker gang took the fight into the desert, challenging the cartels in ways no one had anticipated. It was a deadly collision of two violent worlds. The setting was no ordinary battleground. The border between the United States and Mexico has long served as a vast, ungoverned corridor, a 1,000-mile expanse of shifting sand where smugglers and mercenaries have all left their mark. Somewhere in the midst of that barren expanse, the two forces met. It all began when local law enforcement started noticing and even documented unexplained burned vehicles and shell casings from 7.62mm rounds. Witnesses even reported motorcycle convoys escorting trucks in formation across hidden trails near the small town of Y, Arizona. At that point, few believed the Angels would ever challenge a cartel directly. But belief, as history often proves, is the first casualty of silence. The night the confrontation unfolded began without warning. It was like any other desert patrol along the borderlands. In the early hours of March 17, 2024, a convoy of 12 vehicles, later traced to Los Ninis, the enforcement arm of the Sinaloa cartel, entered an unregulated corridor just outside the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. Their mission appeared routine: to transport military-grade weaponry toward a safe house near the small settlement of Kasab, believed to be a narcotics hub for shipments bound to Phoenix. The trucks carried arms more suited for war than smuggling: belt-fed machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, and surveillance drones equipped with night vision. Yet the men inside were unaware that the northern route they planned to use was already under watch. Unbeknownst to them, the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club had moved into position days before, quietly establishing control over the same corridor. An unnamed federal official described the ensuing clash as the first recorded instance of a direct tactical engagement between an American outlaw motorcycle organization and a Mexican cartel. According to a post-incident report compiled by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the Angels had infiltrated the area in advance, setting ambush points using strategic methods reminiscent of their operations from the 1970s. They concealed weapons beneath natural cover, communicated via encrypted shortwave frequencies, and maintained complete radio silence during movement. The Arizona front was reportedly commanded by Rex Mendez, a former U.S. Marine expelled from the club years earlier for unauthorized missions, only to be reinstated for what members called a shared cause. Mendez was notorious for his battlefield discipline and his personal vendetta against narcotics traffickers. At approximately 14 minutes past 1 in the morning, the cartel convoy entered what investigators described as a precisely calculated kill zone. Thermal satellite systems detected intense flashes of light across the desert, muzzle bursts so powerful that military orbital sensors initially registered them as atmospheric lightning. What followed was a firefight lasting roughly 43 minutes across nearly 3 miles of open terrain. A border ranger stationed 11 miles to the north recounted the sound as An endless wave of automatic gunfire, like Fallujah all over again. Intelligence briefings later revealed that roughly 40 Angels faced more than 200 cartel combatants. The bikers employed dune trails to encircle the convoy, launching coordinated attacks from both the northern and western flanks using semi-automatic rifles and improvised explosives. Forensic audio analysis confirmed the use of NATO-style hand signals and staggered firing tactics, indicating a level of training uncommon in organized crime. By sunrise, aerial drones captured the desolation, trucks burning in the sand, smoke rising into the Sonoran dawn, and scores of bodies scattered along the battlefield. The Angels had vanished by the time authorities arrived. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's El Paso office later estimated 317 casualties, the majority affiliated with Los Ninis. Among the dead was Victor El Pez Quintanero, a mid-level cartel lieutenant responsible for fentanyl logistics along Arizona's corridor. His death ignited a violent internal purge across Mexico as rival factions turned on one another in suspicion. While federal agencies publicly labeled the incident a transnational criminal conflict, they refused to identify suspects. Yet locals along the border claimed they already knew of the Hells Angels' involvement. It was later revealed that the federal intelligence had long been aware of the Angels' increasing activity in the region. They simply chose not to intervene. The official reasoning behind the government's silence was never made clear, but leaked internal memoranda suggested that certain federal officials viewed the Hells Angels as an unofficial, stabilizing force along the border. Now, the United States is now fully involved in the war against the cartels. President Trump has taken a bold step, officially declaring that the U.S. is in an armed fight against drug cartels he now calls terrorist groups. In a private memo sent to Congress this week, his administration labeled suspected cartel smugglers as unlawful combatants. This move came after 3 deadly U.S. strikes in the Caribbean last month, where 17 people aboard boats were killed. The memo, obtained by major news outlets, explains the administration's legal argument. These strikes were not crimes, but acts of war. By treating cartel members as combatants, the president is claiming extraordinary wartime powers. Under international law, countries in an armed conflict can target enemy fighters even if they aren't actively attacking, hold them without trial, and try them in military courts. For the Trump administration, this declaration is more than semantics. It formally sets the stage for a military campaign that could expand U.S. authority in ways not seen in recent decades. The memo signals that the administration sees the fight against cartels as a battlefield operation rather than a law enforcement mission. That distinction is critical. It allows the military to strike and detain without the usual legal limits applied to police actions. But not everyone agrees. Experts in the law of war warn that calling the drug war an armed conflict stretches the rules. Jeffrey Korn, a retired Army lawyer who advised on law of war issues, says that drug cartels aren't technically in hostilities against the United States. Selling drugs, even on a massive scale, is different from launching an armed attack. The distinction matters. International law usually reserves wartime powers for nations fighting an enemy in battle, not for punishing criminals. Still, the administration is moving forward. U.S. forces have been quietly tracking cartel activity, targeting boats and supply chains far from U.S. shores. The strikes in the Caribbean were precise and deadly, showing how military resources are now being used to tackle the drug war directly. By framing it as armed conflict, Trump's team is seeking legal cover for these operations, even if future missions push the boundaries of international law. Jeffrey Korn, a retired Army law expert, slammed President Trump's decision to label cartel smugglers as combatants, saying it breaks a major legal rule. The military cannot deliberately target civilians or people not actively fighting, even if they are suspected criminals. Korn didn't mince words. This isn't stretching the rules. It's shredding them. It's tearing them apart. However, the White House defended the strikes. Spokeswoman Anna Kelly said Trump acted within the law of armed conflict to stop cartels from sending deadly drugs to the U.S. She added that the president is delivering on his promise to confront the cartels and remove threats before more Americans die. The administration frames the strikes as self-defense, arguing that the law allows the military to kill, not arrest, cartel smugglers on the high seas because the groups have been labeled terrorists. The stakes are high. Tens of thousands of Americans die each year from drug overdoses, and the administration sees aggressive military action as a way to cut off the flow at its source. But critics question the strategy. Most cartel-related fentanyl entering the U.S. comes from Mexico, while recent operations have focused on boats from Venezuela. That mismatch raises questions about the logic of targeting South American shipments rather than focusing on the main supply routes. Legal specialists have also flagged broader concerns. Calling these strikes an armed conflict against terrorists is one thing. Using that claim to justify killing civilians or non-combatants is another. The law of war is clear. Civilians cannot be deliberately targeted. Jeffrey and other experts warn that labeling suspected smugglers as combatants sets a dangerous precedent and stretches international law to its limits. Despite the legal criticism, the Trump administration shows no signs of backing down. By presenting the strikes as preemptive self-defense, it argues that every action is necessary to protect Americans from drugs that are killing them at an alarming rate. The administration's message is stark. These are not ordinary criminals. They are threats to national security, and U.S. forces have the right to act decisively. The controversy touches on a core tension between law and strategy. Military experts and lawyers argue over whether the United States can truly classify cartel smugglers as combatants, while the administration prioritizes immediate action against the deadly opioid crisis. For the moment, the strikes continue, signaling a new, aggressive approach to fighting cartels, one that uses military force far beyond traditional law enforcement, and one that could redefine the rules of engagement in the drug war. According to a confidential notice shared with lawmakers, the administration described the recent U.S. strikes on cartel boats as part of a continuous campaign, not isolated acts of self-defense. The notice indicated that Trump viewed cartels involved in drug smuggling as non-state armed groups and believed their operations amounted to an armed attack on the United States. Using international law terminology, the administration suggested this constituted a non-international armed conflict, a phrase typically applied to civil wars or fights with non-state actors. The memo reportedly stated that, based on repeated hostile acts against U.S. citizens and interests, the president had determined that the country was in such a conflict with these designated terrorist organizations. The notice, which was marked "controlled but unclassified," reportedly repeated earlier arguments justifying military action while adding new claims. It portrayed U.S. operations against cartel boats as part of a sustained, active effort rather than spontaneous self-defense missions. This framing, the administration implied, would give U.S. forces broader powers under the laws of war, allowing them to strike targets without warning and treat suspected cartel operatives as combatants. Legal experts reportedly questioned the move. They noted that a non-international armed conflict is a 20th century legal concept developed to cover civil wars or conflicts involving groups that are not sovereign nations. Some specialists argued that drug smuggling, even on a massive scale, did not constitute an armed attack. Nonetheless, the administration maintained that this classification justified decisive military action and expanded powers beyond normal law enforcement limits. The notice also reportedly emphasized the growing threat of drug trafficking to the U.S., implying that cartel operations should be treated as hostile acts against national security. This suggested that future military intervention could be broader in scope, with strikes, detentions, and prosecutions conducted under the laws of war rather than domestic criminal statutes. By formally framing the fight as an armed conflict, Trump was said to be laying the legal groundwork for continued and expanded U.S. military operations. The administration appeared to signal that cartel networks were now considered enemies on the battlefield, and that the rules governing engagement had shifted accordingly. Legal observers reportedly noted that the Trump administration appeared to draw parallels between the fight against drug cartels and past conflicts with non-state actors, such as Al-Qaeda. After the September 11th attacks in 2001, the United States went to war against Al-Qaeda, which operated across multiple countries. At the time, some legal scholars argued that the Bush administration was stretching the law to justify using wartime powers against a group they saw as more akin to pirates than an organized army. The Supreme Court, however, ruled that the conflict with Al-Qaeda was a legitimate war. It reportedly allowed the Bush administration to hold captured Al-Qaeda members indefinitely without trial under wartime authority, while emphasizing that the Geneva Convention still required humane treatment and prohibited torture. The court's approval relied heavily on the fact that al-Qaeda had intentionally attacked the United States using hijacked airplanes to kill civilians, and that Congress had authorized armed force against the group. Earlier, in 2006, the court had rejected the administration's first attempt to establish military commissions, stating that explicit congressional approval was necessary. Observers indicated that the Trump administration is now taking a different approach by treating cartel operations as armed attacks. In its notice to Congress, the administration reportedly claimed that cartels, through drug trafficking, illegally and directly cause the deaths of tens of thousands of American citizens each year. Critics argued that this reasoning conflated criminal activity with acts of war, noting that selling illegal drugs does not constitute the use of armed force. Unlike the al-Qaeda conflict, Congress has not authorized military operations against cartels, and the administration has not clearly explained how trafficking an illicit product qualifies as a military threat. Legal experts reportedly raised concerns that this comparison stretched international law and set a controversial precedent. While the administration emphasized the deadly impact of cartel operations, specialists noted that the legal framework for wartime action requires an actual armed attack, not the indirect harm caused by criminal enterprise. Despite these concerns, the administration appeared to use the argument to justify broader military powers, framing cartel operatives as combatants rather than ordinary criminals. The move, according to observers, highlighted the administration's willingness to apply lessons from past conflicts with non-state actors to a domestic challenge. It suggested a reinterpretation of wartime authority to address perceived national security threats from organized crime. While supporters argued that decisive action was necessary to protect Americans from the opioid crisis, critics warned that the legal justification lacked the clear congressional authorization that had supported wartime measures in the past. It was reportedly noted that the U.S. government had long described its efforts against drug trafficking as a metaphorical war on drugs, meaning aggressive law enforcement rather than actual combat. The Trump administration, however, claimed that the United States had entered a literal state of war against drug cartels. Experts said this distinction was important legally because under normal law, police could arrest suspected dealers, but summarily killing them would be a crime. In a declared armed conflict, however, it is lawful to kill enemy combatants on sight. The notice to Congress reportedly defended a recent strike on a boat on September 15th, in which U.S. Special Operations Forces killed all 3 people aboard. The administration described the crew as unlawful combatants, treating them as soldiers on a battlefield. The notice reportedly stated that the vessel had been assessed by U.S. intelligence as affiliated with a designated terrorist group and engaged in drug trafficking, which could ultimately harm Americans. It added that the strike destroyed the boat, the drugs, and all 3 unlawful combatants. The memo, however, reportedly did not name any specific cartels involved, nor did it clarify the standards used to decide which suspects had sufficient links to justify military action. Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, the top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, reportedly accused the president of waging secret wars against anyone he calls an enemy. Reed stated that Trump had offered no credible legal justification, evidence, or intelligence for the strikes. He emphasized that cartels should be handled by law enforcement and criticized the administration for deploying thousands of troops, ships, and aircraft against undefined enemies while keeping Congress and the public uninformed. The Pentagon, through spokesman Sean Parnell, reportedly maintained that the Defense Department was carrying out the mission successfully in compliance with domestic and international law and in line with the law of armed conflict. Parnell stated that Congress had received the required notifications. Legal specialists, however, reportedly remained skeptical. Brian Finucane, a former State Department lawyer who has criticized the boat strikes, noted that under international law, a non-state entity must meet the standard of being an organized armed group to be considered part of an armed conflict. Finucane reportedly said that he was not surprised the administration had relied on this legal theory to justify the operations, but questioned whether the targets qualified as organized armed groups. Specifically, Finucane reportedly cited the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, which the administration had discussed targeting. An intelligence assessment declassified in April indicated that the group consisted of loosely organized cells of local criminal networks. Its decentralized structure reportedly made coordination difficult, raising doubts about whether the gang met the threshold for a non-international armed conflict. With the Hells Angels' brutal desert strike and the United States now formally declaring war on the cartels, the message is unmistakable. The age of impunity is ending. What began as a biker-led retaliation has evolved into a government-sanctioned campaign. Between outlaw vengeance and federal firepower, the cartels now face enemies on every front. The night sky lit up with fire as the United States fighter jets roared into action, unleashing a strike that reduced a secret cartel fentanyl lab to rubble in seconds. This was America's power in full display in the war with cartels. With fentanyl overdoses now killing more than 84,000 Americans every year, the stakes have never been higher. Is this the beginning of something much bigger? And how far will the United States go to crush the cartels once and for all? Join us as we find out just how far America is willing to go in its battle against the fentanyl crisis. At 30,000 feet, 12 F-22 Raptors move across the sky like shadows. No sound trails behind them, and no warning betrays their approach. On radar screens, they are ghosts. Far below, hidden beneath a thick canopy, a billion-dollar fentanyl complex runs without pause, relying on terrain and secrecy for protection. But this is not a mission of bullets or firefights. What follows is not noise or spectacle, but a strike shaped by silence and exact control. The F-22 was built to vanish. Its edges are cut to deflect radar, and the skin of the jet is layered with special coatings that swallow signals before they can return to the source. Even the engines are buried behind curved ducts that keep reflections from giving away their position. Decades of engineering produced a jet that slips through modern defenses as if they were never there. Avoiding detection is more than just shape and coating. The F-22 manages its heat output so efficiently that infrared sensors read little more than background air. Radio chatter is cut to almost nothing. When pilots do communicate, it is through encrypted bursts so short they vanish in a blink. Secure satellites carry their data, separate from civilian networks, ensuring nothing leaks into the open. Every system works toward the same goal: get close, strike, and disappear. Each Raptor carries 2 GBU-39 small-diameter bombs. At 250 pounds each, they are compact but devastatingly accurate. GPS guidance steers them to within 3 feet of a target. If jamming disrupts the signal, laser guidance finishes the job. The smaller size of the bomb allows Raptors to carry more weapons without compromising stealth, and the focus blast means a single building can be destroyed without flattening everything around it. The chosen target sits deep in Sinaloa's wilderness. Workers in masks handle chemicals inside a facility capable of producing enough fentanyl to kill tens of millions. For years, the jungle's cover kept sites like this out of reach. That advantage is gone. Synthetic aperture radar can now pierce clouds in the canopy. Thermal sensors pick up the faint glow of generators. Intercepted communications map the hierarchy of cartel leaders. Tools first used against terror networks in Afghanistan and Iraq now turn against organized crime with the same precision. With the target confirmed, the command is given: execute. The Raptors close in, still invisible to Mexican radar. 24 bombs drop at once, falling clean through the sky without trails or thunder. Gravity pulls them down, guided all the way to the mark. The first explosion tears into the heart of the compound, shaking the jungle for miles. The second touches off chemical storage tanks, setting off a chain reaction that rips the site apart. In a matter of seconds, the billion-dollar facility is reduced to a crater of scorched earth and twisted debris. What once fueled global trade is gone. By the time local security forces respond, the jets have vanished. Radar never registered them. The skies look untouched. The only sign comes from intercepted cartel messages, frantic voices repeating a single phrase: they know where we are. This is stealth warfare, no spectacle, no drawn-out exchange. Just the certainty that when the strike comes, it is sudden, silent, and final. Then the Raptors vanish once more, leaving only fear in the silence overhead. The crater in Sinaloa was more than the destruction of one lab. It signaled the unraveling of empires crafted by men who believed terrain and corruption made them untouchable. These were not street dealers. They were architects of billion-dollar syndicates that operated like shadow governments. But who were the minds behind these fortresses that defied states for decades? Rafael Caro Quintero earned the title Narco of Narcos by rewriting the playbook of the drug trade. In the 1980s, this Sinaloa native did not simply move cocaine. He engineered the first major pipeline linking Colombian cartels through Mexican corridors into American cities. His Guadalajara cartel became the prototype for every organization that followed. Ruthless violence fused with logistical discipline, shifting narcotics from street sales to industrial-scale distribution. Quintero's empire collapsed after one fatal miscalculation. DEA agent Enrique Camarena uncovered too much: routes, contacts, and operations. In retaliation, cartel gunmen abducted him, and after 30 hours of torture, left his body sealed in plastic. The 1985 murder triggered international outrage and a manhunt that ended with Quintero locked in prison. But prison was temporary. In 2013, a Mexican court freed him on a legal technicality. At 60, instead of fading into retirement, he vanished into Sinaloa's mountains. From bunkers carved into rock, he rebuilt operations with satellite internet, encrypted devices, and tunnel systems that allowed entire networks to function unseen. The Trevino Morales brothers added a new terrifying dimension. Miguel, Z40, and Omar, Z42, were not traditional traffickers. Both were elite soldiers from Mexico's special forces who deserted to form the backbone of Los Zetas. Years of military discipline had reshaped the cartel into something more than a criminal outfit. It became a paramilitary machine. Under the Zetas' command came armored trucks, night vision gear, and assaults so well coordinated they looked like full-scale military operations. More deserters were drawn to their ranks, and what started as an enforcement arm soon grew into one of the most feared cartels Mexico had ever seen. They didn't stop at drug trafficking. Kidnapping, human smuggling, and extortion became part of their empire, spreading fear across entire states. Even when the leaders were locked behind bars, their power reached out through coded notes and corrupt officials who carried out orders on the outside. And then there was Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, another figure who carried on a legacy of blood and violence. When his brother Amado, the Lord of the Skies, died during botched plastic surgery in 1997, Vicente inherited the Juarez cartel. He turned Ciudad Juarez into one of the deadliest battlefields of the 21st century. Between 2008 and 2012, more than 10,000 lives were claimed as rival cartels clashed for control of the Juarez-El Paso crossings. These bridges were gateways worth billions, where every shipment into the United States represented fortunes. For Vicente, geography decided everything. To lock down his territory, he bought off police forces, slipped money into judges' pockets, and secured protection from officials who should have stood against him. Violence was the tool he used to strike fear, but corruption was the armor that made him untouchable. These weren't street thugs. They operated on another level. They raised armies, taxed whole communities, enforced their own rules, and built black market economies strong enough to rival real governments. The strength of their empires was buried out of sight. Their labs were dug in and fortified, run like clockwork with crews rotating around the clock. Generators kept the power steady, cutting off outside eyes. And when the pressure came from law enforcement, escape tunnels gave their bosses a clean way out. The structures they designed and perfected became blueprints for the cartels that dominate today. Intelligence reports estimate the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels now control more than 60% of global fentanyl production, operating on frameworks designed by Quintero, the Treviños, and Carrillo Fuentes. These networks endured assassinations, arrests, and full-scale military campaigns, reshaping themselves into syndicates strong enough to survive long after their founders were gone. For years, these masterminds believed their mountains and alliances rendered them immune to outside power. But surveillance satellites, synthetic aperture radar, and thermal imaging were already sketching bullseyes over the facilities they thought could never be touched. The men who built cartel empires believed their mountain strongholds and political protection made them untouchable. For decades, they lived as though hidden in plain sight. What they didn't see coming was that the same technology once aimed at Moscow's missile fields would eventually turn south. peeling back every layer of secrecy they thought would last forever. The U-2 Dragon Lady still climbs into the sky at dawn, its long wings flexing as engines push the aircraft towards 70,000 feet. In the Cold War, this spy plane brought back photos of nuclear launch sites deep inside Soviet territory. Now its cameras pivot toward Mexico, where its lenses read license plates and track convoys through cartel countries, all while the aircraft stays legally outside the border. On paper, it looks like a routine patrol. In reality, it's one of the most sophisticated intelligence missions of America's modern drug war. Washington doesn't wait. Where there was one flight a month, there are suddenly nearly 20 in less than 2 weeks. Aircraft designed to track submarines beneath Arctic ice or missiles across Siberia are redirected to the deserts and jungles of the Americas. The Cold War arsenal has found a new enemy. The Navy's P-8 Poseidon, a maritime hunter built to stalk Russian subs across the Pacific, now sweeps over the borderlands. Its sensor pods, worth more than the annual defense budget of some nations, can crack encrypted radios, listen in from hundreds of miles, and cut through storms or darkness to reveal facilities long thought invisible. The same technology that once searched for steel hulls beneath the polar seas now exposes fentanyl labs hidden under jungle canopy. Then comes the breakthrough, synthetic aperture radar. Instead of photographs, it builds maps by bouncing radio waves off the ground, revealing tunnels, airstrips, and bunkers that standard surveillance can't touch. Cartel compounds carved into mountains appear on American screens with the kind of detail engineers once reserved for Soviet launch silos. Drones join the hunt. Predators redeployed from Middle Eastern battlefields circle quietly over the South, listening for every whisper of digital life. Cell phones, satellite links, and encrypted apps are all vacuumed up and processed before cartel leaders even realize their messages were sent. What once felt like secure communication now betrays them with every call. The shock inside cartel ranks is instant. Intercepts show bosses abandoning long-used safe houses overnight, convinced the walls themselves are betraying them. No matter how often the convoys change their routes, satellites still manage to track them with exact precision. The remote terrain that once kept them hidden now works against them, turning those same stretches of land into perfect targets for strikes launched from far away. Thermal imaging reads the heat of workers laboring in bunkers. Signals intelligence turns encrypted satellite phones into glowing beacons for American operators. What criminals built as fortresses now serve as targets. For cartels, the message is unmistakable. The invisible have become visible. The tools built to keep superpowers in check are now dismantling their empires, one coordinate at a time. The hunters were now the hunted. Tools once built for Cold War standoffs had been repurposed, aimed not at Moscow but at Mexico's mountains. Is this setting the stage for a political gamble that would redraw the lines of America's war on crime? On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump signed an order in the Oval Office that formally reclassified Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. The move shifted their legal standing from criminal groups to the same category as organizations such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The consequences were immediate. Intelligence agencies gained new authority for covert action, untethered from law enforcement's red tape. The Pentagon could apply the same counterterrorism playbook once used in Iraq and Afghanistan, this time on cartel targets just across the border. What had been a fight against crime became, legally, a war. For anyone tied to cartel networks, the designation was a nightmare. Prosecutors could now pursue terrorism charges not just for drug smuggling, but for anything deemed material support. Paying protection money, running goods through cartel corridors, and even sending family cash back home risked being recast as aiding terrorists, an offense carrying decades in prison. The first test case came quickly. Maria del Rosario Navarro Sanchez, a 39-year-old Mexican woman accused of supplying grenades to the Jalisco New Generation cartel, was indicted as a terrorism supporter. Her golden AR-15 rifle, nicknamed El Dorado, was paraded in court as proof. The shock rippled through cartel ranks as lawyers realized the old rules of prosecution no longer applied. Trump wielded more than law. At dawn, he turned to Twitter, threatening 25% tariffs on all Mexican imports unless President Claudia Sheinbaum crushed the cartels. With $400 billion in annual trade on the line, The threat landed like a hammer. For Mexico's leaders, the past was never far away. The United States' 1914 occupation of Veracruz remained a raw memory, taught in schools, retold in family stories, and embedded in the country's politics. The sight of American forces massing at the border, captured in new satellite images, stirred those memories. Inside Sheinbaum's cabinet, comparisons to Veracruz surfaced in hushed conversations. Some warned that history had a way of circling back when least expected. In public, Sheinbaum projected defiance. Before the cameras, she denounced Washington's threats and promised that Mexico would not be bullied into submission. Her words struck the right chord for evening newscasts, giving anxious citizens the sense that their president would not bend to outside pressure. Privately, the situation was far more delicate. Trump's warnings hinted at direct military action, and the weight of those threats could not be ignored. In a calculated move, Sheinbaum authorized limited United States surveillance flights from a discreet airfield outside Mexico City. It was a concession meant to cool tempers in Washington without stirring outrage at home. The response escalated. 10,000 Mexican troops poured into the northern states, chasing the same targets Washington wanted destroyed. Behind the scenes, foreign ministers scrambled to keep diplomacy alive. Then came the shock move. Before dawn, Mexican authorities extracted 29 cartel bosses from prisons across the country. Rafael Caro Quintero, the narco of narcos, whose killing of DEA agent Enrique Camarena had poisoned relations for decades, was put on a plane. Alongside him were Vicente Carrillo Fuentes of the Juarez Cartel and the Trevino Morales brothers of Los Zetas. It was a logistical feat that looked like something from wartime. Simultaneous transfers, heavy escorts, and United States aircraft standing by to scatter prisoners to 8 different cities under federal indictment. It was also unprecedented. Mexico had always extradited piecemeal after years of legal wrangling. Sending 29 kingpins in one sweep reeked of desperation, but it worked. Trump announced a temporary freeze on tariffs, praising Mexico's cooperation while demanding further crackdowns, especially on fentanyl production. The message was clear. The cartels were no longer just criminals. They were enemies of the state, and the rules of engagement had changed. But rules on paper are one thing. Outcomes on the ground are another. When the United States government decided to label Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, it gave officials new powers to go after them. For the first time, the United States could use military-style tactics that had previously only been used against groups like Al-Qaeda overseas. The first big action was an airstrike on a Sinaloa cartel drug lab. Right away, signs of disruption appeared. Communications showed that cartel commanders abandoned safe houses they had used for years. Supply convoys stopped running on normal routes because drivers feared being spotted from above. Even secure drug labs were left empty. Workers realized that bunkers and underground sites could not protect them from satellite-guided bombs. United States monitoring of cartel radio traffic showed leaders becoming more secretive, using codes and limiting their communication out of fear it could be tracked. This fear spread quickly. Rival leaders accused each other of working with United States intelligence, which led to violent internal purges. In Culiacan, killings rose sharply, from 39 a month to 116 by October 2024, according to Insight Crime. Groups also took advantage of the chaos to fight over territory. Analysts said that trust inside the cartels was breaking down. Some cartel members who had once obeyed orders without hesitation began to grow uneasy, fearing their movements, and safe houses were already known. That hesitation chipped away at discipline and made it harder for the groups to stay organized. Meanwhile, the United States pressure started to show results. In early 2025, the DEA announced record-breaking drug seizures, nearly 10,000 kilograms of fentanyl and more than 50,000 kilograms of methamphetamine, the highest amounts ever documented. Diplomatic moves soon followed. The United States paused planned tariffs for 30 days after Mexico deployed 10,000 troops to border regions and handed over 29 cartel leaders to United States custody. These moves opened space for deeper cooperation between the two governments. Cartels found ways to adapt. Some groups started looking beyond the United States, shifting more operations toward Europe and Asia. There were reports of drones being tested, either for keeping watch or for possible attacks. Others began working on cyber tools meant to interfere with government systems. Smuggling routes changed as well. More shipments went by sea through Central America, often hidden in submersibles or fast boats. Small planes were used for airdrops in desert regions, a way to dodge the satellite tracking that made land routes more dangerous. Leaders also spread out power across different cells so that one raid couldn't take down the whole network. The fentanyl crisis is still one of the biggest battles America faces. In 2024, more than 84,000 people died from overdoses, a number that shows how deep the problem runs. Experts point out that as long as people keep searching for these drugs, traffickers will always find ways to supply them. But there are signs of a shift. United States forces are no longer just responding to cartel moves. They're shutting down labs, intercepting submarines packed with drugs, and breaking up networks before shipments reach American soil. At the same time, new investments are going into treatment, mental health services, and rebuilding communities, steps that cut off the demand cartels depend on. The fight isn't over, but for the first time, America looks like it's gaining the upper hand. The cartels are under pressure, and the momentum is starting to turn. The Middle East just witnessed something wild. Iran made a decision that sent shockwaves across the globe. They fired ballistic missiles directly at the most significant American military base in the region. What makes this story even more fascinating is that despite the dramatic nature of the attack, something unexpected occurred. Every single Iranian missile was shot down before it could hit anything. Did their missiles fail because American defenses are simply that good? Or because Iran's much-feared arsenal isn't as dangerous as they've been claiming for years? Join us as we break down what really happened between Iran, the United States, and how the attack unfolded. When Iran launched a massive missile strike against Al Udeid Air Base, the biggest U.S. military facility in the Middle East, Iranian forces called it Operation Glad Tidings of Victory, sending dozens of ballistic missiles screaming toward the base in a coordinated assault that changed everything. This was not a minor border clash or proxy conflict. Iran had just fired directly at American forces, marking the most serious escalation between these two powers in decades. The attack came after recent U.S. airstrikes hammered Iranian nuclear sites, and now Tehran was hitting back hard. Al Udeid sits in one of the most critical spots on the global chessboard. The base hosts thousands of American troops and serves as a command center for operations across the region. When those missiles started falling, it sent shock waves far beyond the Middle East. The Iranian strike is bigger than just retaliation. It's a direct challenge to American military dominance in a region where both countries have been circling each other for years. What started as targeted strikes against nuclear facilities has now exploded into a direct military confrontation that could reshape the entire Middle East. Somewhere between 6 and 19 missiles tore through the night sky, heading straight for the base. The sight alone was enough to make anyone's heart stop. Dozens of incoming warheads that could have turned the facility into rubble and unalived hundreds of people. But then something incredible happened. Every single missile got knocked out of the sky. American air defense systems went to work, tracking each incoming threat and taking them down one by one. When the smoke cleared, the results were almost unbelievable. 0 casualties, 0 damage, and the base kept running like nothing happened. It was a flawless defensive performance that left military analysts scratching their heads. The big question everyone started asking was whether Iran actually wanted to hit anything at all. Some experts think the whole thing was more about sending a message than causing real destruction. Maybe Iran picked targets they knew would be heavily defended, or maybe they gave a warning through back channels. Either way, the attack failed if the goal was to hurt American forces or knock out the base. But if the goal was to show they could reach U.S. targets without starting World War III, then maybe it worked exactly as planned. But other experts see this completely differently. They think Iran seriously miscalculated and ended up looking weak instead of strong. Their missiles, which they've been bragging about for years, got swatted down like flies. If the goal was to project power, this backfired spectacularly. The attack definitely got everyone's attention across the Middle East. Countries in the region are watching closely to see how this plays out. But whether Iran looks more dangerous or more incompetent depends entirely on what they were actually trying to accomplish. Right now, nobody knows for sure if this was brilliant strategic messaging or a massive blunder that exposed serious weaknesses in Iran's military capabilities. The answer to that question could reshape how other countries view Iran's threats going forward. The American defense systems lit up the desert night like the 4th of July. Interceptor missiles launched one after another, tracking down every incoming threat and blowing them apart before they could hit anything. From miles away, it probably looked like some kind of fireworks show. Bright flashes and explosions scattered across the dark sky above Al Udeid. But down on the ground, everything stayed perfectly normal. No bomb craters appeared in the sand. The medical teams had nothing to do. Nobody got hurt, nothing got damaged, and life at the base went on like any other night. That is when military analysts started connecting the dots. This was not really an attack meant to destroy anything. Iran basically put on a show, launching enough missiles to make headlines, but doing it in a way that guaranteed they wouldn't actually hit their targets. Iran gets to say they retaliated against American forces, but nobody passed and nothing got destroyed. No dead soldiers means no pressure for massive retaliation. No damaged infrastructure means the conflict doesn't spiral completely out of control. It was like a perfectly choreographed dance where both sides knew the steps. Iran gets to look tough for their domestic audience, America gets to showcase their defense systems, and somehow nobody ends up starting World War III over it. This issue started after Operation Midnight Hammer with the American airstrikes that took out 3 Iranian nuclear sites. Iran had to respond somehow, but here's where it gets interesting. They basically told everyone exactly what they were planning to do. Intelligence sources later confirmed that Iran quietly tipped off both Qatar and the United States before launching those missiles. They gave a warning about the timing, the targets, everything. That's like calling someone to tell them exactly when and where a surprise party is happening. It defeats the entire purpose. Military strikes work because of surprise. Catch the enemy off guard, hit them before they can react, cause maximum damage with minimal warning. But Iran threw all of that out the window. They made sure American forces had plenty of time to get ready, activate all their defenses, and prepare for exactly what was coming. Once the Americans knew the missiles were coming, the whole thing turned into a completely different kind of event. Instead of a real military attack, it became more like a rehearsal where both sides knew their roles. Iran got to fire missiles and claim they hit back, while America got to show off how well its defense systems work. When both sides know exactly what's going to happen, it stops being warfare and starts being political theater. Iran needed to respond to those nuclear facility strikes, but they found a way to do it without actually starting a real war. President Trump didn't hold back when he addressed the nation about the missile attack. He basically called the whole thing a joke, describing it as a staged play instead of any kind of serious military action. Trump even sarcastically thanked Iran for giving everyone a heads up before launching their missiles. His mockery didn't stop there. Trump suggested that if this was Iran's idea of retaliation, maybe their military commanders needed to go back to school and learn how warfare actually works. The president's tone was completely dismissive, treating the entire incident like some kind of amateur hour performance. The numbers backed up Trump's ridicule. 0 missiles hit their targets, 0 damage to American equipment or facilities, 0 injuries to any personnel. The base kept running its normal operations the entire time, like nothing had even happened. From Trump's perspective, Iran had just handed him a perfect propaganda victory. They launched what sounded like a major attack, but accomplished absolutely nothing. Instead of looking strong and dangerous, Iran ended up looking incompetent and weak on the world stage. This missile attack might not have damaged any buildings or hurt anyone, but it hit something else that could be even more important: America's reputation for being tough when threatened. Here is the problem. When Iran can fire missiles at the biggest U.S. military base in the Middle East, and basically nothing happens to them in return, other countries take notice. Every time America lets something like this slide without hitting back hard, it makes the next attack more likely to happen. North Korea is definitely watching the situation. So is Russia, China too. These countries are all testing boundaries with America in different ways, and they're paying close attention to how each provocation gets handled. If firing missiles at American bases doesn't trigger serious consequences, what's to stop someone from trying something bigger next time? It is like dealing with bullies. Once they realize they can push someone around without getting punched back, they keep pushing harder. The same logic applies to hostile nations. Each successful provocation that goes unanswered makes the next escalation seem more reasonable and less risky. The missiles themselves didn't destroy anything tangible at Al Udeid Air Base, but they might have chipped away at something much more valuable: the fear that keeps America's enemies from taking bigger risks. When deterrence starts breaking down, that's when things can get really dangerous, really fast. Washington's slow reaction to the missile strike basically advertised American weakness to the entire world. When hostile countries see America taking time to think things over instead of hitting back immediately, it changes their calculations about what they can get away with. The math is pretty simple from their perspective. If America hesitates after getting attacked directly, maybe it'll hesitate again next time. Maybe they'll hesitate when something even bigger happens. That kind of thinking makes dangerous countries more willing to roll the dice and see what happens. This creates a snowball effect that keeps getting worse. Iran fires missiles and nothing major happens to them. North Korea sees this and thinks maybe they can get away with something too. Russia notices the pattern and decides to push a little harder somewhere else. Each time America doesn't respond with overwhelming force, the next country in line feels more confident about testing boundaries. The problem isn't just about Iran anymore. It's about every hostile nation watching how America handles direct attacks on its military. When enemies start believing America will talk instead of fight, they stop being afraid of American power. This cycle keeps feeding itself until someone finally pushes too far and forces a massive response. But by then, the damage to American credibility had already spread across multiple conflicts and regions. The world becomes less stable because everyone thinks America won't defend its red lines anymore. While Iran hoped to project strength through its missile demonstration, regional neighbors interpreted the attack very differently and responded with alarm rather than admiration. Qatar, which hosts Al Udeid Air Base and thousands of American troops, immediately condemned the strike as a violation of its sovereignty, since the attack essentially turned Qatari territory into a battleground without permission. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain quickly closed portions of their airspace and elevated their military alert levels, showing how Iran's actions had created fear rather than respect among the very countries it hoped to influence. The stock markets told the real story about Iran's missile attack better than any news report could. Oil prices barely budged when those missiles started flying, which is pretty incredible when it happens near the biggest American military base in the Middle East. Anytime missiles start flying around oil-producing regions, traders panic and energy prices shoot through the roof. Everyone assumes supply chains will get disrupted and conflicts will spread. That's been the pattern for decades. But this time was completely different. Oil prices actually dropped a little bit right after the attack, then just settled back to normal levels. Iran's missile strike backfired diplomatically, pushing away potential allies instead of rallying support for its cause. Diplomats from Jordan, Egypt, and Turkey privately expressed concerns about Iran's reckless decision-making, viewing the attack as a risky move that delivered no meaningful gains. This shift in regional perception creates a dangerous cycle for Iran, as growing isolation forces the country to rely more heavily on military demonstrations to project power, which only highlights its weaknesses further. The choice of target revealed a major tactical error that undermined Iran's entire operation. Al Udeid Air Base represents the most heavily defended United States installation in the Middle East, equipped with advanced radar systems and multiple layers of air defense technology. By targeting such a well-protected facility, Iran essentially guaranteed that its missiles would be intercepted, turning what should have been a show of strength into a demonstration of military inadequacy. The complete failure of the strike exposed serious flaws in Iran's missile capabilities and targeting systems. Every single missile was intercepted before reaching its target, resulting in zero destruction, zero injuries, and zero disruption to American military operations. For a country that wants recognition as a regional power, this kind of public failure damages credibility more than any diplomatic setback could. The attack raised questions across Europe and the Gulf states about Iran's actual military capabilities, rather than inspiring fear or respect. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers handled the entire operation. These aircraft were the only ones that could carry bombs big enough to punch through Iran's buried nuclear sites and actually destroy them. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed that the B-2s flew deep into Iranian territory and made it back without anyone detecting them. According to Hegseth, this was the longest B-2 mission since 2001 and the biggest B-2 strike ever conducted. The choice of aircraft made perfect sense. Iran had built these nuclear facilities underground specifically to protect them from regular bombing runs. Standard fighter jets simply don't carry the kind of massive bunker-buster bombs needed to crack through all that concrete and steel. Only the B-2 could handle this kind of mission. These stealth bombers can fly thousands of miles without being seen on radar, carry enormous payloads, and hit targets that other aircraft can't even reach. The fact that they completed such a long-range mission into heavily defended airspace and came home undetected shows exactly why America spent so much money developing these planes. The Northrop B-2 Spirit represents one of the most advanced military aircraft ever built. This American heavy strategic bomber uses something called low observable stealth technology, which basically means it can slip past even the most sophisticated enemy air defenses without being detected. Think of it like an invisibility cloak for aircraft. Enemy radar systems simply cannot see it coming. Most people know it simply as the stealth bomber, and it has become the go-to aircraft when America needs to strike targets that other planes could never reach. When it comes to firepower, the B-2 Spirit can carry an impressive arsenal of conventional weapons. These include standard Mark 82 and Mark 84 bombs, CBU-87 combined effects munitions, Gator mines, and the CBU-97 sensor-fused weapon. But the real game changer is its ability to carry the massive ordnance penetrator, a 30,000-pound bomb designed specifically to destroy heavily reinforced underground bunkers. The B-2 can carry up to 2 of these massive weapons, 1 in each bomb bay, and as of 2012, it remains the only aircraft capable of deploying this devastating munition. The aircraft also features cutting-edge technology that makes it incredibly effective in combat situations. The low probability of intercept AN/APQ-181 multi-mode radar works as part of a sophisticated digital navigation system. This system includes terrain-following radar and global positioning system guidance, along with the NAS-26 astro-inertial navigation system that was originally developed in the 1950s. All of these technologies work together to help the aircraft navigate precisely to its targets while avoiding detection. Perhaps most importantly, the B-2 includes a defensive management system that constantly monitors for potential threats during missions. This system can automatically assess how dangerous different enemy defenses might be and recommend the safest routes to avoid them. Recent upgrades have made this system even more capable of detecting radar emissions from air defense systems and then feeding that information to an auto-router that can change the flight path in real time. This means the aircraft can automatically adjust its route to stay as safe as possible while completing its mission. Flying the B-2 Spirit is nothing like piloting a regular aircraft because of its unique flying wing design. This shape makes the plane naturally unstable in the air, similar to trying to balance a paper airplane that wants to tumble in every direction. To solve this problem, the B-2 uses an incredibly sophisticated quadruplex, computer-controlled, fly-by-wire flight control system. This means that computers are constantly making tiny adjustments to keep the aircraft stable without the pilot having to do anything. The pilot gives general commands about where to go, but the computers handle all the precise movements needed to keep the plane flying smoothly. The aircraft gathers information about flying conditions through special pitot-static sensing plates instead of the traditional pitot tubes found on most planes. Regular pitot tubes would stick out from the aircraft and show up on enemy radar, completely defeating the stealth design. These sensing plates measure things like airspeed and the angle of attack while staying completely flush with the aircraft's surface. The flight control system also includes both hydraulic and electrical components with multiple backup systems. So if one part fails, others can take over to keep the plane flying safely. Getting directional control on a stealth aircraft presented unique challenges because most traditional control methods would increase the radar signature. After testing various options, Northrop engineers settled on a combination of split brake rudders and differential thrust from the engines. This means the plane can change direction by using different power levels from its engines rather than relying entirely on visible control surfaces. Engine thrust became crucial not just for forward movement, but also for controlling how the aircraft pitches up and down and rolls from side to side. The B-2 has 4 pairs of control surfaces along the back edge of its wings, and different surfaces work at different times depending on flight conditions. Most of these surfaces operate throughout normal flight, but the inner elevons typically only activate during slow-speed situations like landing approaches. During takeoff, all the elevons stay drooped downward until the aircraft reaches sufficient airspeed. This prevents damage from ground contact and helps create the proper nose-down attitude needed for a successful takeoff sequence. Cartels began with flimsy submarines that barely floated, yet they smuggled cocaine past patrols and changed the drug trade. Today, these crude crafts have become stealth machines worth hundreds of millions. But when one vanished, it sparked a brutal war between Mexico's deadliest cartels. How did subs become their ultimate tool, and why did losing one unleash chaos across a region? Join us as we uncover the underbelly of cartel operations and explore how the United States is actively working to combat organized crime. Cartels have been messing around with narco submarines for years now. These subs get reconfigured in secret jungle workshops where most people are forced to work at gunpoint. The first set of these submarines were literal death traps. Diesel fumes would fill the cramped spaces, crews would pass out before reaching shore, and the subs moved so slowly that fishing boats could overtake them. But they worked just enough to slip past the Coast Guard with tons of narcotics on board. Then the cartels got smarter. They brought in actual engineers, started using GPS navigation, diesel engines that actually worked, and even special paint that doesn't show up on radar. What started as floating coffins turned into something else entirely. Underwater money machines that could haul more product than a fleet of trucks ever could. So here's where everything went sideways. The Jalisco cartel apparently stole one of these subs from the Cartel del Noreste. The submarine was carrying hundreds of millions in cocaine. But for the Noreste cartel, losing the drugs wasn't even the worst part. Getting robbed is the kind of disrespect that starts wars in their world. And that's exactly what happened. First came the insider who'd leaked the submarine's route. They found that person pretty quick and made an example of them. Then the war started. At first it was low-key, then people started disappearing. But it didn't stay quiet. Allegedly, both sides had their armies out in the streets. Smaller gangs were forced to choose sides, and entire towns got caught in the crossfire. All because of one stolen submarine. The Cartel del Noreste, or Northeast Cartel, started after the collapse of Los Zetas, a group originally formed by ex-military and police personnel. Their background gave them more than just street-level tactics. They operated with military precision. The organization functions with a strict hierarchy, structured commands, and harsh enforcement. They are known for extreme violence. Their approach goes beyond intimidation. Targets are eliminated without hesitation. Weapons are sourced from Eastern Europe or taken directly from Mexican military supplies. Their vehicles are heavily modified, armored plating, mounted firearms, and reinforced frames built for combat on the move. Now their rival, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. A newer group, but just as lethal, possibly more calculated. Instead of relying purely on force, they've built their operations around tech. Teams include hackers, drone pilots, and digital specialists who monitor law enforcement movements in real time. They use encrypted communication and custom apps to coordinate drug shipments with precision. While other cartels lean on intimidation, Jalisco focuses on tactics. They've even released videos flaunting advanced weapons and high-end gear, designed to intimidate opponents and attract recruits. The conflict was not limited to land. Both cartels have been linked to the use of custom-made submarines, often called narco subs. These low-profile vessels travel through the Pacific, staying beneath radar detection. Some are built to haul several tons of cocaine in a single trip. Crews are trained to operate them, and when authorities close in, the subs are frequently abandoned at sea. Escape plans are usually in place. sometimes involving jet skis or small boats stashed nearby for quick getaways. Smuggling routes have evolved into highly organized networks, often described as drug superhighways. Cartels transport illegal goods using modified trucks, compact aircraft, and underground tunnels that cross borders. Decoy convoys and standard shipping containers are also part of the strategy. GPS tracking and forged documents keep the system running smoothly, resembling legitimate logistics operations. Some groups even produce fake invoices and customs forms to mirror standard import procedures. The cargo, however, carries a far more dangerous impact. The first clash between the cartels escalated after a major drug shipment disappeared. Investigators point to the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, which reportedly intercepted a large load belonging to the Cartel del Noreste. The cargo, valued in the tens of millions, vanished without a trace. For the Cartel del Noreste, the loss wasn't just financial. In cartel dynamics, stealing from another group is seen as a serious offense. Retaliation isn't optional, it's part of the code. The theft wasn't random, it came from inside. Sources indicate that someone within the Cartel del Noreste leaked the location of the shipment. A leaked government memo added another layer to the story. The document, allegedly from inside Mexico's administration, indicated that officials were aware of rising tensions between the cartels but chose not to intervene. It even suggested that some saw the conflict as an opportunity for mutual destruction. The president dismissed the memo as fake. However, unnamed law enforcement sources claimed it was authentic. If accurate, the violence may have been deliberately ignored or potentially allowed to escalate by design. Once the fighting escalated, allegiances changed quickly. Smaller gangs that had previously stayed out of the conflict began choosing sides, aiming to align with whoever looked stronger. Some aligned with the Jalisco cartel for protection, while others remained loyal to the Cartel del Noreste, driven by fear or long-standing ties. Corrupt units, already suspected of taking bribes, were spotted escorting cartel vehicles through security checkpoints. Local politicians were also implicated, supporting whichever group offered safety or financial backing. What started as a drug turf dispute evolved into a broader struggle for control over territory and influence. For months, the United States Intelligence Agency monitored northern Mexico closely. The CIA and DEA tracked cartel communications and flagged signs of an impending conflict. Warnings were reportedly sent to Mexican officials, but those alerts didn't lead to action. When violence broke out, the response from Washington changed. Fentanyl is a major reason the United States is closely watching the cartel conflict. This synthetic opioid has triggered a nationwide crisis, with over 100 critical cases reported daily. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel plays a key role in trafficking the drug, moving large quantities across the border. So when violence between the two rival groups disrupted operations, authorities saw a drop in fentanyl seizures in certain areas. But analysts cautioned that the slowdown wouldn't last. Once the cartels regrouped, the flow was expected to resume. Some United States lawmakers escalated the conversation by proposing direct military action against cartel operations, including drone strikes on Mexican soil. The Mexican government responded firmly, labeling the proposals as violations of national sovereignty. Despite the public tension, coordination quietly moved forward. Surveillance activity along the border ramped up, intelligence sharing became more frequent, and joint task forces conducted discreet arrests. While official statements showed that the two countries were not in alignment, operational collaboration continued behind the scenes. The ripple effects didn't stop at Mexico's borders. Cartels in Colombia and Venezuela watched closely, ready to expand if a major Mexican group lost ground. In Central America, governments in places like Guatemala and Honduras prepared for the possibility of violence crossing into their territory. Past conflicts have made one thing clear: cartel wars rarely stay local. Once they ignite, they tend to spread fast, drawing more countries into a cycle driven by violence, control, and money. Decades ago, Mexican cartels began testing strange, homemade submarines that looked nothing like the conventional vessels. These early narco subs were semi-submersible and typically constructed from fiberglass, offering poor ventilation and limited space for comfort. They were slow and often broke down at sea, yet they served a vital purpose. They were cheap to make, easy to abandon when necessary, and despite their many flaws, they managed to move hundreds of kilograms of cocaine past patrols without being noticed. As time passed, cartel engineers improved their designs. What began as clumsy prototypes evolved into advanced machines capable of traveling thousands of miles beneath the radar. Many were powered by diesel engines and guided by satellite navigation systems. These upgrades allowed the vessels to glide through coastal waters and across oceans almost unseen. By the time law enforcement caught on, the technology had already improved, and the balance of power changed in the smuggling trade. Life inside these subs, however, was far from glamorous. Crews of 3 to 5 men endured weeks in cramped conditions, fighting off claustrophobia while inhaling toxic diesel fumes. They faced storms in the open sea with no way to call for help if things went wrong. Although the cartels often paid well to those who made the journey, many sailors were abandoned once the cargo was delivered, and some vessels were sunk deliberately in the middle of the ocean to erase any evidence. For many of these men, the voyage was a gamble. The reason submarines became so important is clear. A single vessel could carry several tons of cocaine in one trip, making it far more efficient than moving small loads through trucks or drug mules at the border. This new method gave cartels direct access to the United States and even European markets, creating smuggling channels that were faster and harder to detect. Whoever controlled the submarine operations held the ultimate card in the war, and this power was enough to start fights that shook entire regions. Military and narco submarines follow completely opposite design approaches. Naval engineers build submarines to keep crews alive for months at sea. Each critical system gets backup systems, then backups for the backups. These boats need to work perfectly whether cruising under Arctic ice or patrolling tropical waters. The hull calculations alone involve complex math to handle pressure that would crush a car like a soda can. Life support systems filter air, make fresh water, and manage waste for over 100 people. Nuclear reactors or advanced diesel engines move these massive machines through the water. Drug smugglers think about submarines differently. They want something cheap that moves drugs from point A to point B without getting caught. Safety comes second to avoiding detection. Most narco subs get built once, used once, then abandoned or scuttled. The builders use whatever materials they can find. Fiberglass, plywood, basic engines from fishing boats, no backup systems, no redundancy, just enough equipment to make the trip. If something breaks during the voyage, the crew better hope they can fix it with duct tape and prayers. This difference shows up in every part of the boats. Military submarines have multiple ways to surface in emergencies. Narco subs might have one ballast system that either works or doesn't. Navy crews train for years on safety procedures. Drug runners often learn how to operate their submarine during the actual smuggling run. The construction process tells the whole story. Military shipyards use precision tools, computer modeling, and years of testing. The USS Virginia-class submarines, for example, take approximately 7 years to build and cost over $3 billion. Narco submarines can be constructed in jungle clearings within months, using materials costing tens of thousands of dollars. The technical disparities between these vessel types are staggering. Modern military submarines like the Los Angeles-class or Virginia-class boats measure over 350 feet in length and displace thousands of tons. They can dive to depths exceeding 800 feet and maintain submerged operations for months, limited primarily by food supplies rather than mechanical constraints. Narco submarines typically measure 60 to 100 feet in length and can barely submerge fully. Most are semi-submersibles that ride just below the surface, with only a small conning tower or breathing apparatus visible above water. True fully submersible narco submarines are rare and show significant technological achievements for criminal organizations. Even the most sophisticated narco submarines can typically only dive to depths of 50 feet and have extremely limited underwater endurance. The engines tell a similar story. Navy submarines run on nuclear power or sophisticated diesel-electric setups that work without surface air. Nuclear subs can stay underwater forever. The only limit is how much food they packed. They move fast, too, hitting 30-plus knots while completely submerged. Both vessel types prioritize avoiding detection, but their approaches differ fundamentally. Military submarines employ sophisticated stealth technology, including anechoic hull coatings that absorb sonar pings, advanced noise dampening systems, and carefully designed hull shapes to minimize acoustic signatures. Modern military submarines are among the quietest machines ever built, capable of operating undetected even in heavily monitored waters. Narco submarines achieve stealth through simplicity and expendability. Their small size, low profile, and basic construction materials make them difficult to detect using conventional radar or sonar. They exploit the vast emptiness of the ocean and the limitations of maritime patrol capabilities. Most narco submarines are painted blue or gray to blend with ocean colors and ride low in the water to minimize visual detection. The detection challenge for law enforcement is significant. The ocean covers over 70% of Earth's surface, and even with satellite surveillance, aircraft patrols, and naval vessels, the probability of intercepting any single narco submarine is relatively low. This mathematical reality drives the continued use of these vessels, despite their obvious limitations. Narco submarines typically rely on basic GPS systems when surfaced and simple compass navigation when submerged. Communication is minimal and often limited to prearranged signals or basic radio contact. This communication silence is both a security feature and a limitation, as crews cannot call for help if problems arise. The technological evolution of military submarines shows humanity's advancement in materials science, nuclear physics, computer technology, and marine engineering. Narco submarines have shown surprising technological evolution despite their crude origins. Early versions were barely seaworthy rafts with minimal submersion capability. Modern examples incorporate more sophisticated hull designs, better engines, and improved navigation systems. Some recent narco submarines have approached the size and capability of small military coastal submarines, representing significant advancement in criminal engineering capabilities. Law enforcement agencies face unique challenges when combating narco submarines. Unlike military submarines, which operate in known patrol areas and follow predictable patterns, narco submarines can launch from remote jungle locations and follow unpredictable routes. The vessel's small size and low profile make them nearly invisible to traditional maritime surveillance systems. Countries have built detection systems whose only job is finding and tracking submarines. The whole situation basically comes down to submarines trying to stay hidden while entire navies work around the clock to find them. Both sides keep developing better technology. Submarines get quieter, detection systems get more sensitive, and the cycle continues. For months, American intelligence had been tracking cartel operations and getting more worried about what they were seeing. The Central Intelligence Agency's drones were flying over huge stretches of ocean, spotting boats that didn't show up in any official shipping records. Meanwhile, the Drug Enforcement Administration was trying to map out where these submarines might be traveling, basically trying to figure out the invisible routes cartels use to move drugs north. The United States kept sending intel to Mexican authorities, but most of it got ignored. This left United States officials stuck in a bad spot. They could see something big was happening, but couldn't get anyone to take it seriously. The whole situation felt like watching a disaster build in slow motion, while nobody wanted to do anything about it. America was already deep in a drug crisis when the submarine war started. Federal agencies estimated that massive shipments of fentanyl and cocaine were crossing borders daily, generating billions in illegal profits annually. The Jalisco cartel controlled a huge chunk of this trade. Then came the submarine conflict. Suddenly, the steady stream of drugs into major cities slowed to a trickle. Street dealers ran low on supply. Seizures dropped dramatically. But this wasn't good news. It meant something bigger was happening behind the scenes. The cartels had discovered submarines could move more product than traditional smuggling routes. While they fought for control of these vessels, their entire distribution network went into reorganization mode. Law enforcement watched nervously, knowing this pause was temporary. The submarine situation escalated to the point where military action became part of the conversation. In one extreme case, American forces actually deployed an A-10 Warthog aircraft to destroy cartel operations hidden in the jungle. Politicians in Washington started pushing for more aggressive tactics. Some wanted the Navy to sink cartel submarines the moment they were spotted, even in Mexican waters. Mexico immediately pushed back hard against this idea. No foreign military gets to operate in their territory without permission, period. Behind closed doors, though, both governments knew something had to change. They hammered out agreements for joint operations. American surveillance aircraft started flying patterns along the Mexican coast. Naval vessels from both countries began coordinating patrols. The cooperation happened quietly, away from the public arguments. The entire focus shifted at this point. Intelligence agencies weren't just worried about drug shipments anymore. If cartels had submarines capable of moving cocaine, those same vessels could transport weapons, explosives, or other dangerous cargo. The implications went far beyond the drug trade. This became about preventing underwater smuggling routes from turning into something much worse. Officials feared these submarines could become a pipeline for military-grade weapons that might end up anywhere in the hemisphere. The stakes had grown from drug interdiction to regional security. The fallout hit everywhere at once. Colombian and Venezuelan cartels were watching this whole mess unfold, ready to jump in if Mexican supply lines stayed broken. Central American countries knew what was coming. When Mexican cartels fight, the violence always spills south. Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, they'd all seen it before. This wasn't about drugs anymore. If cartels can move tons of cocaine underwater without anyone noticing, they can move anything. Rockets, military explosives, the kind of weapons that start wars. The submarine situation had morphed into something way bigger than drug trafficking. Latin American governments were looking at a security nightmare that could destabilize the entire region. These weren't just criminals with boats anymore. They had their own naval operations running right under everyone's noses, and nobody really knew how deep it went or what else might be moving through those channels.
FA-18 Super Hornet, assigned to the Norfolk-based USS Harry S. Truman, has been lost to the Red Sea.
Over the years, technological progress, especially in the field of warfare, has cemented the United States' position as one of the most formidable nations globally. Its military strength is undeniable, yet it raises eyebrows when groups dare to challenge this superpower. One such bold challenger? The Mexican cartel. Recently, they made an audacious move against one of America's most prized military assets, an aircraft carrier. But how did that play out? And was there a deeper motive behind the strike? Stick around as we explore how the cartel came to regret their brazen attack on a U.S. aircraft carrier. The United States has long been regarded as a master of modern warfare, excelling in air, land, and sea combat. On the other hand, the Mexican cartel has carved out a reputation as one of the world's most ruthless criminal organizations, infamous for brutal killings and lawlessness that defies belief, earning them global notoriety. To provide some background, in 2023, a video surfaced allegedly showing operatives of the Sinaloa cartel unleashing chaos in Culiacan, a major city in Mexico. Reports indicated that they were equipped with heavy weaponry, resembling a rogue paramilitary unit rather than a criminal gang. This violent eruption was triggered by the capture of Ovidio Guzman Lopez, the son of jailed drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Ovidio is suspected of being a significant player in the cartel's leadership. But why does this matter to the United States? The cartel's increasing influence has allowed it to dominate much of the U.S.-Mexico border, where they manufacture potent narcotics using chemicals reportedly sourced from parts of Asia, particularly China. These makeshift labs in Mexico produce large quantities of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid. With a vast and vulnerable market just across the border, the cartel found eager buyers in the U.S. already entrenched in the region. Their presence has been fortified by heavily armed guards patrolling their smuggling routes. Despite the Biden administration's public stance on fighting substance abuse, efforts have often hit a wall. The cartel's grip on the border has complicated U.S. initiatives, and synthetic drugs like fentanyl have only escalated the country's overdose crisis, surpassing even the infamous drug wars of the early 2000s when Miami was flooded with Colombian cocaine. In response to the escalating crisis, President Joe Biden took an overnight flight to the southern border to assess the situation firsthand. What he saw left him shocked, and he publicly expressed a strong desire to protect the nation from further cartel infiltration. Most adversaries might retreat or reconsider after such a gesture from the President of the United States, but the cartels didn't flinch. After Biden's visit and the capture of Ovidio, cartel forces launched an all-out assault on parts of Mexico, engaging in armed conflict with both the military and Navy, amounting to what many would describe as domestic terrorism. Video footage from the encounter showed cartel gunmen firing big-caliber Barrett rifles and other weapons at unidentified aerial targets. In retaliation, Mexico's naval forces brought out FN Herstal gun pods, each armed with a powerful M3P machine gun mounted on their T-6C+ aircraft. This confrontation was reportedly ignited by news that Ovidio was being relocated to a maximum security prison in Mexico City, about 650 miles from Culiacan. The cartel hoped to intercept and rescue him before he arrived at the facility. Armed with heavy weapons and retrofitted armored vehicles, cartel operatives set up roadblocks along major highways in Sinaloa, trying to stage a repeat of a 2019 jailbreak attempt that had previously succeeded. This time, however, their efforts failed. Ovidio was transferred to Altiplano Prison in early January 2023. After 7 months in custody, he was extradited to the U.S. to face a slew of drug trafficking charges. This high-profile extradition bruised the cartel's ego, and their fury was soon directed at the United States. Rumors of a retaliatory operation started to circulate, whispers of a possible attack on American military assets. Some even claimed that this would involve targeting U.S. aircraft carriers, an astonishing and seemingly suicidal objective given America's military dominance. At first, many dismissed the rumors. After all, the idea that drug traffickers would dare to challenge the U.S. Navy seemed far-fetched. But intelligence operatives on the ground and analysts tracking darknet chatter began to take the threat more seriously. According to reports, several cartels, including the Sinaloa faction, were allegedly coordinating a joint assault on the United States, fueled by outrage over Ovidio's extradition and the crackdown on their operations. Among their targets, the very symbol of American naval power, the aircraft carrier. Aircraft carriers are more than just large warships. They serve as mobile air bases, capable of deploying fighter jets, launching missiles, and running complex surveillance missions. These vessels are among the most strategic and powerful tools in the U.S. military's arsenal. So for a criminal organization to attempt to strike, one was seen as nothing short of madness. Yet for the cartels, it wasn't about logic. It was about vengeance and wounded pride. This radical move pushed the U.S. Navy into a heightened state of readiness, anticipating an attack that could come from anywhere, at any time. But what makes these carriers such high-value assets? Historically, necessity has been the mother of military innovation, and for the U.S. Navy, that necessity has always been war, whether sparked by broken diplomacy or the need to defend sovereign territories. The aircraft carrier has its roots in early 20th century strategy. One of the first notable examples was the USS Enterprise CV-6, which came into service as America prepared for the shifting dynamics of naval warfare. As World War I revealed the weaknesses of traditional battleships without air cover, the concept of aircraft carriers gained traction. By the 1930s, the U.S. introduced the Enterprise CV-6, nicknamed the Big E. It was the seventh ship to bear the name and part of the Yorktown-class carriers. During World War II, particularly in the infamous Pearl Harbor attack, the importance of carriers became crystal clear. Although the Enterprise wasn't docked at Pearl Harbor during the Japanese strike due to weather delays, it was the first to launch a counterstrike, sending out aircraft to confront the enemy. This marked a turning point in naval strategy, establishing aircraft carriers as indispensable to U.S. military operations. Since then, these vessels have undergone massive upgrades. Today's models are built to support next-gen fighter jets and serve as crucial links between the U.S. Navy and Air Force. Take the USS Harry S. Truman, for instance. This nuclear-powered supercarrier, part of the elite Nimitz class, serves as a linchpin in what's known as a carrier strike group. Named after America's 33rd president, she's based in Norfolk, Virginia. Commissioned in 1998 and built by Newport News Shipbuilding, the Truman is a behemoth of maritime warfare, capable of projecting power anywhere in the world with unmatched precision. As soon as the aircraft carrier was operational, the United States deployed it under NATO command, integrating it into missions like Operation Joint Endeavor and Operation Deny Flight. Initiatives that began on April 12, 1993, to enforce a United Nations no-fly zone over Bosnia and Herzegovina. Initially tasked with surveillance and support throughout major missions in the early 2000s, the USS Harry S. Truman took on a far more direct role by 2016, ready for the shift. Having already established itself as a central force within the Navy's carrier strike groups, it was no surprise when the Truman was selected for deployment in Operation Inherent Resolve, a coordinated campaign against ISIL, the radical Islamist militant group in the eastern Mediterranean. Unlike the legendary USS Enterprise CV-6, the Truman is a technological powerhouse, something you'd expect from the imagination of a Marvel or Disney blockbuster. This floating fortress spans 1,092 feet in length and measures 257 feet across, with a height equivalent to a 24-story skyscraper reaching 240 feet. Engineered to intimidate by design, the Truman is capable of housing over 90 carrier-based aircraft and uses 4 elevators to traverse its towering structure. But its true edge lies in its propulsion. Dual Westinghouse 4W nuclear reactors, granting it remarkable range without refueling. Even at 56 kilometers per hour, this vessel doesn't slow down. Its 2003 Battenberg Cup win only adds to its global prestige. Since 2014, it served as a strategic warning to terrorist factions and national armies alike. So when rumors began to surface about a Mexican cartel-led alliance planning to engage it directly, few believed such a reckless assault could actually materialize. But cartel pride is a fierce motivator, especially after a humiliating loss. As years passed without incident, it seemed the cartel had finally accepted defeat. But that illusion shattered on March 15th when intelligence confirmed an attempted strike on the carrier strike group centered around the USS Harry S. Truman. Flanking the carrier were the USS Gettysburg cruiser and 3 destroyers, USS Stout, USS Jason Dunham, and USS Sullivans. Within a carrier strike group, the flagship, home to the Admiral and the Central Command, is always surrounded by protective warships. The carrier rarely engages directly. Instead, cruisers and destroyers act as the front line. Think of it like chess. The aircraft carrier is the queen, powerful, vital, and fiercely protected. The cruisers and destroyers are your rooks and knights, versatile and always ready to defend the board. Cruisers are second only to carriers in size within a strike group. Their primary missions? Search and destroy operations, escorting fleets across hostile waters, and executing sea denial. A classic strategy to block enemies from accessing a strategic body of water without necessarily controlling it yourself. So, when interference was detected through spyware and surveillance, both the carrier and its cruiser immediately transitioned to battle mode, activating their destroyers. While destroyers are smaller than their carrier or cruiser counterparts, they bring an arsenal powerful enough to decimate enemy forces on land, sea, or air. Each flagship may only have 1 cruiser, but it can deploy several destroyers, its mobile guardians. These destroyers come equipped with Aegis combat systems, a sophisticated radar network that scans vast ranges and identifies every object in its airspace or waters, allowing rapid threat assessment and response planning. Beyond their detection systems, destroyers wield a terrifying payload. Among their arsenal, standard warship missiles for various targets and the infamous Tomahawk cruise missiles, long-range, high-damage weapons that can obliterate both land and air threats. But even the Tomahawk isn't their crowning weapon. Each destroyer features 2 advanced gun systems, AGS, that fire long-range land attack projectiles. These projectiles travel up to 63 nautical miles, tripling the range of traditional naval surface weapons. Their real strength lies in versatility. Destroyers specialize in air defense, surface warfare, submarine tracking, and high-impact strike missions. Despite being surrounded by these fearsome warships, any one of which could dismantle their forces, the cartel alliance didn't immediately back down. Their determination to strike remained. But after being detected, one of the U.S. warships launched a missile directly at a cartel defense position, wiping it out instantly. This overwhelming show of force sparked a hasty retreat from the cartel militia. Though whispers of revenge echoed behind them, the devastation they witnessed served as a stark reminder of the U.S. Navy's dominance. Will the cartel regroup and attempt another showdown? Only time will tell. Thanks for watching. Before you go, don't forget to click on the video suggestion on your screen for more gripping military stories. See you there!